Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Wikipedia. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. This is Wikipedia. Hegel redirects here via the use of the Hegel disambiguation. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, German Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, 27th of August 1770 to the 14th of November 1831, was a German philosopher and is considered one of the most important figures in German idealism. He is also considered one of the fundamental figures of modern Western philosophy, with his influence extending to the entire range of contemporary philosophical issues, from aesthetics to ontology to politics, both in the analytic and continental tradition. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Portrait by Jakob Schlesinger, 1831. Born 27th of August 1770, Stuttgart, Duchy of Württemberg. Died 14th of November 1831, aged 61, Berlin, Kingdom of Prussia. Nationality German. Education Gymnasium Illustra zu Stuttgart. Tübinger Stift, University of Tübingen. MA 1790, University of Vienna. PhD 1801. Era 19th century philosophy. Region Western philosophy. School Continental philosophy. German idealism. Objective idealism. Absolute idealism. Hegelianism. Historicism. Naturphilosophy. Epistemic coherentism. Conceptualism. Empirical realism. Coherence theory of truth. Institutions: University of Vienna 1801 to 1806, University of Heidelberg 1816 to 1818, University of Berlin 1818 to 1831. Thesis: Dissertatio Philosophica de Orbitis Planetarium, Philosophical Dissertation on the Orbits of the Planets 1801. Academic Advisors: Johann Friedrich Lebret. Blah blah. Notable students: Johann Eduard Erdmann. Main interests: metaphysics, epistemology, naturphilosophy, philosophy of history, ethics, political philosophy, logic, aesthetics. Notable ideas: absolute idealism, Hegelian dialectic, master-slave dialectic, Aufheben, sublation, Geist, mind, spirit, Sittlichkeit, ethical order, alienation, dialectical phenomenology, the three moments of the concept, universality, particularity, and individuality, abstract particularity, the abstract concrete distinction, judgment of history, the true is the whole, rationality, alone is real, the truth of being is essence, logical holism, panlogism, distinction between critical metaphysics of understanding and speculative metaphysics of reason, inferentialism, notion, the negative-positive liberty distinction, the civil society-state distinction, Volksgeist, schemes of classification of arts. Influences: Aristotle, Boehme, Diderot, Ferguson, Fichte, Goethe, Heraclitus, Herder, Kant, Luther, Plato, Rousseau, Spinoza, Schiller, Adam Smith. Influenced: Adorno, Badiou, Bakunin, Barth, Bauer, Blunt, Shelley, Bosanquet, Bradley, Brandom, de Beauvoir, Bueno, Bulgakov, Butler, blah blah blah. Marcuse, Lukács, Lenin, Goering, Marx, McDowell, blah blah blah. Hegel's principal achievement was his development of a distinctive articulation of idealism, sometimes termed absolute idealism. in which the dualisms of, for instance, mind and nature and subject and object are overcome. His philosophy of spirit conceptually integrates psychology, the state, history, art, religion, and philosophy. His master-slave dialectic has been influential, especially in 20th century France. Of special importance is his concept of spirit, Geist, sometimes also translated as mind, as the historical manifestation of the logical concept and the sublation of Aufhebung, integration without elimination or reduction of seemingly contradictory or opposing factors. Examples include the apparent opposition between necessity and freedom, and between immanence and transcendence. Hegel has been seen in the 20th century as the originator of the thesis, antithesis, synthesis triad, but as an explicit phrase it originated with Johann Gottlieb Fichte. Hegel has influenced many thinkers and writers whose own positions vary widely. For example, Paul Tillich wrote that the historical dialectical thought of Hegel has influenced world history more profoundly than any other structural analysis. Karl Barth described Hegel as a Protestant Aquinas, and Maurice Merleau-Ponty wrote that all the great philosophical ideas of the past century, the philosophies of Marx and Nietzsche, phenomenology, German existentialism, and psychoanalysis, had their beginnings in Hegel. Michael Hart has highlighted that the roots of post-structuralism and its unifying basis lies in large part, in a general opposition not to the philosophical tradition to core, but specifically to the Hegelian tradition dominating philosophy in the 20th century prior to post-structuralism. Hegel's work has been considered the completion of philosophy by multiple of the most influential thinkers in existentialism, post-structuralism, and 20th century theology. Derrida wrote of Hegel in his work of Grammatology that he undoubtedly summed up the entire philosophy of the Logos. He determined ontology as absolute logic. He assembled all the delimitations of philosophy as presence, later remarking that Hegel is thus the last philosopher of the book and the first philosopher of writing, indicating the relation of Hegel to post-structural thought by stating, if there were a definition of différance, it would be precisely the limit, the interruption, the destruction of the Hegelian dialectical synthesis wherever it operates. I'm not understanding any of this. It's foreign to me, and I think it's a bit retarded. In his work Systematic Theology, theologian Paul Tillich referred to Hegel's work as perfect essentialism, later writing essentialism was in Hegel's system fulfilled. Martin Heidegger observed in his 1969 work Identity and Difference, and in his personal black notebooks, that Hegel's system in an important respect consummates Western philosophy by completing the idea of the Logos, the self-grounding ground, in thinking through the identification of being and beings, which is the theme of logic. Writing, it is incontestable that Hegel, faithful to tradition, sees the matter of thinking and beings as such and as a whole, in the movement of being from its emptiness to its developed fullness. Heidegger in various places further stated Hegel's thinking to be the most powerful thinking of modern times. Life, early childhood, the birthplace of Hegel in Stuttgart, which now houses the Hegel Museum. Hegel was born on the 27th of August 1770 in Stuttgart, capital of the Duchy of Württemberg in southwestern Germany. Christened Georg Wilhelm Friedrich, he was known as Wilhelm to his close family. His father, Georg Ludwig, was Rentkammersekretär, secretary to the Revenue Office and the court of Karl Eugen, Duke of Wittenberg. Hegel's mother, Maria Magdalena Luisa née Fromm, was the daughter of a lawyer at the High Court of Justice at the Wittenberg Court. She died of bilious fever, Galen fever, when Hegel was 13. Hegel and his father also caught the disease, but they narrowly survived. Hegel had a sister, Christiane Louise, 1773 to 1832, and a brother, Georg Ludwig, 1776 to 1812, who perished as an officer during Napoleon's 1812 Russian campaign. At the age of 3, Hegel went to the German school. When he entered the Latin school 2 years later, he already knew the first declension, having been taught it by his mother. In 1776 he entered Stuttgart's Gymnasium Illustra, and during his adolescence read voraciously, copying lengthy extracts in his diary. Authors he read include the poet Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock and writers associated with the Enlightenment such as Christian Garve and Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. His studies at the Gymnasium concluded with his Abiturrede, graduation speech, Der verkümmerte Zustand der Künste und Wissenschaften und der Türken, the abortive state of art and scholarship in Turkey. Tübingen, I can't be fucked. How boring. So boring. Hegel and Napoleon in Jena, whose meeting became proverbial due to Hegel's notable use of Weltseele, and to Napoleon the world's soul on horseback. What a load of shit. With his finances drying up quickly, Hegel was under great pressure to deliver his book, The Long-Promised Introduction to His Philosophical System. Hegel was putting the finishing touches to it, The Phenomenology of Spirit, as Napoleon engaged Prussian troops on the 14th of October 1806 in the Battle of Jena on a plateau outside the city. On the day before the battle, Napoleon entered the city of Jena. Hegel recounted his impressions in a letter to his friend Friedrich Emanuel Niethammer. I saw the Emperor, this world soul, Weltseele, riding out of the city on reconnaissance. It is indeed a wonderful sensation to see such an individual who, concentrated here at a single point, astride a horse, reaches out over the world and masters it. Pinkard 2000 notes that Hegel's comment to Niethammer is all the more striking since he had already composed a crucial section of the Phenomenology in which he remarked that the revolution had now officially passed to another land, Germany, that would complete in thought what the revolution had only partially accomplished in practice. Although Napoleon chose not to close down Jena, as he had other universities, the city was devastated and students deserted it in droves, making Hegel's financial prospects even worse. The following February marked the birth of Hegel's illegitimate son, Georg Ludwig Friedrich Fischer, 1807 to 1831, as the result of an affair with Hegel's landlady, Christiane Burkhard née Fischer, who had been abandoned by her husband. In March 1807, Hegel moved to Bamberg, where Niethammer had declined, and passed on to Hegel an offer to become editor of a newspaper, the Bamberger Zeitung. Unable to find more suitable employment, Hegel reluctantly accepted. Ludwig Fischer and his mother, whom Hegel may have offered to marry following the death of her husband, stayed behind in Jena. In November 1808, Hegel was again, through Niethammer, appointed headmaster of a gymnasium in Nuremberg, a post he held until 1816. While in Nuremberg, Hegel adapted his recently published Phenomenology of Spirit for use in the classroom. Part of his remit was to teach a class called Introduction to Knowledge of the Universal Coherence of the Sciences. Hegel developed the idea of an encyclopedia of the philosophical sciences falling into three parts: logic, philosophy of nature, and philosophy of spirit. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, so sad. Hegel's illegitimate son, Ludwig Fischer, had died shortly before while serving with the Dutch army in Batavia, and the news of his death never reached his father. Early the following year, Hegel's sister, Christiane, committed suicide by drowning. Hegel's remaining two sons, Karl, who became a historian, and Emmanuel, who followed a theological path, lived long and safeguarded their father's manuscripts and letters and produced editions of his works. Emmanuel, it wouldn't be Kant, would it? Philosophical work, Logic and Metaphysics, main article, Science of Logic. See also Porphyrian Tree. During the era of German idealism, every standard work on logic consisted of three divisions: doctrines of concept, judgment, and inference. Doctrines of concept address the systematic hierarchical relations of the most general classes of things. Doctrines of judgment investigate relations of subject and predicate, and doctrines of inference lay out the forms of syllogisms originally found in Aristotelian term logic. Indeed, logic in the field of 19th century continental philosophy takes on a range of meanings from metaphysics to the theory of science, from critical epistemology to first philosophy, and debates about the nature of logic were intertwined with competition to inherit the mantle of Kant and with it the future direction of German philosophy. Each new logic book staked a new claim in a century-long expansionist turf war among philosophical trends. With the possible exception of the study of inference, what was called logic in 19th century Europe bears little resemblance to what logicians study today. Logic, especially the doctrine of the concept, was metaphysics. It was the search for a fundamental ontological structure within the relations of the most basic predicates, quantity, time, place, etc., a practice that goes back to the Pythagorean table of opposites, Plato's sophist, Aristotle's categories. The research program took on new meaning with the 1781 publication of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Kant derived his own table of categories, what he called the 12 pure ancestral concepts of the understanding that structure all experience irrespective of content, from a standard term logical table of judgments, noting also that the true ancestral concepts also have their equally pure derivative concepts which could by no means be passed over in a complete system of transcendental philosophy, but with the mere mention of which I can be satisfied in a merely critical essay. Hegel's Science of Logic is a notable contribution to the philosophical study. Oh no! Hegel's Science of Logic is a notable contribution to the philosophical study of category. Hegel's Science of Logic is a notable contribution to the philosophical study of category metaphysics in its post-Kantian form. Hegel takes up the project that Kant suggested as necessary but did not complete, namely to take note of and, as far as possible, completely catalogue the derivative concepts of the pure understanding and completely illustrate its family tree. The affinity between Hegel and Kant's logic, speculative and transcendental, respectively, is reflected in their vocabulary. Kant spoke of Entstehen, coming to be, and Vergehen, ceasing to be, the same two terms Hegel used to refer to the two compositional elements of Werden, becoming, and although the logic's table of contents minimally resembles Kant's table of categories, the four headings of Kant's table, quantity, quality, relation, and modality, do not play in Hegel's dialectic the organizational role that Kant had in mind for them. Indeed, Hegel faulted Kant for copying the table of judgments from the modern compendiums of logic, whose subject matter is, Hegel said, in need of total reconstruction. So how are the concepts derived? Hegel wrote that profounder insight into the antinomial, or more truly into the dialectical nature of reason, demonstrates any concept, begriff whatsoever, to be a unity of opposed elements, momenta, to which therefore the form of antinomial assertions could be given.